I just need to know when I'll be able to listen in again. We've been recording blind without a script for almost a week now. I need results, not lessons on all this wizardry.
It's not wizardry. It's podcasting.
Dun dun.
Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a bit about ourselves along the way. I'm Abu, and as always, I'm joined by my immaculately dressed co-host, Opsa.
Why, thank you. And we're right back at you, sir.
Opsa, we are here to close the book on Wool by Hugh Howey.
That's right.
We are talking through chapters 53 to 82, part 5 of this book, and concluding our read-through of it today.
Indeed.
I'm excited.
Let's get into our housekeeping.
Yes.
Spoiler warning, you said it. We're going through chapter 82. That's the end of the book. We've done it all 5 chapters, or 5 parts, I should say, of this book. And hopefully you've been reading along with us. I know a lot of you have been sharing your thoughts. And if anybody else wants to join in the conversation, you can email us at sci-fi bookclubpod@loreparty.com. You can join our Patreon and find other people interested in this world of science fiction that we find ourselves in at patreon.com/sci-fi bookclubpod. We've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, bloopers, all the good stuff. And you'll also find our Discord there, where we like to keep these nerdy sci-fi discussions going.
That's right. And all of those links are going to be in the show notes, so check them out after you're done listening. Okay, here's the game plan for today's book club discussion. As usual, we will begin by summarizing the chapters assigned for today's reading. Then we will get into our impressions of not only these chapters, but at this point, our overall thoughts about the book now that we've completed it. Finally, we will wrap up with a deep dive into our sci-fi analysis, pick apart some themes that we picked up on in the book, and give this book our final Science Fiction Book Club official rating.
Oh, yeah.
So, before we get into all that, let's take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, folks. When we come back, we are finishing this book.
Looking for a pickup truck to get just about anything done? Look no further. The Chevy Silverado EV isn't just the most powerful Silverado ever, with next-level towing capability and technology. It also offers game-changing versatility with the available multi-flex midgate and tailgate, which means Silverado EV helps you carry large, bulky, and oddly shaped items up to nearly 11 feet in length. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive. Visit Chevrolet.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Welcome back, listeners. And now let's do a bit of a brief summary on part 5.
Yes.
So this section starts out from the perspective of the down deep mechanic, Mark. He's caught in the middle of the chaotic battle for control with IT and has suffered some pretty serious injuries. Despite his disorientation and hearing loss, we do learn through him that the resistance leaders, McLean and Knox, have both died from a bomb explosion.
Oh my gosh, R.I.P.
And unfortunately, he soon joins them as he ends up sacrificing himself so his wife, Shirley, can escape to safety.
Yeah, harrowing stuff. And I will say, bullets seem to be flying indiscriminately.
Oh, yeah.
Are we just firing bullets openly in this enclosed silo with innocents everywhere?
Yeah, apparently. And there seems to be some friendly fire, I will say.
For real?
You know?
Woo. This does not seem like the ideal situation for the
Agreed.
silo. Well, we then fast forward 3 weeks. The focus shifts now to Walker in Silo 18, who is plagued by the guilt over this chain of events that has led to all the bloodshed and violence in Silo 18, which he blames himself for. He feels guilty for instigating this, for colluding with Juliet, which led to Juliet going outside and et cetera, et cetera. This domino of events that led to where we are now. He is currently preoccupying himself with a radio that he's tinkering with. Basically, the people in Mechanical who are fighting need him to figure out this radio so that they can continue fighting and snoop in on the IT soldiers outside.
Right.
Meanwhile, we also jump over to Juliet in Silo 17, who hatches this plan alongside Solo to dive into the lower regions of Silo 17, which, as we know, are flooded. They're completely submerged underwater.
Right.
This dive is pretty horrifying stuff, Obes. Like,
Yeah.
I was quite uncomfortable reading these chapters. I think they're really well written.
Right.
Juliet nearly meets her end here, nearly drowns. Her air hose inexplicably fails, and she has a difficult time finding her way back up to the surface. She's got these weights strapped to her that she has to cut off her legs so that she can float back up to the top.
Right.
It's really harrowing stuff. She does make it back up top, only to find Solo is bleeding out.
Oh, no.
He's been attacked.
Dang.
This, of course, ratchets up the tension in Silo 17 because Solo maybe isn't so solo.
Oh, no.
And this clearly means there has to be at least one other survivor here.
Right. Some saboteurs, it seems.
Mm.
Yes. Well, meanwhile, in Silo 18, Lucas is immersing himself in all of
Lucas.
these forbidden historical texts.
Yes.
And they reveal some of the dark origins of the Silo system, and in particular, the orchestrations of the mysterious world order.
Yeah. Do you think there's any porn?
They're
Like a Playboy or two?
I think he's occupying himself somehow. All right, he's all alone. And Papa Bernard is there,
Right.
which we should say complicated, but pretty manipulated in one-sided relationship.
Oh, surely.
Bernard is clearly trying to mold him into a loyal successor.
Mm-hmm.
There are all sorts of weird vibes that you can kind of pick up off the page between them.
Yeah.
It's kind of this like Pavlovian thing, but
Ugh,
also
it's icky.
It's icky, you know, and ultimately it seems like Lucas is aware of it. He's clearly in a strange, tense, really captive situation.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, Walker and Shirley are succeeding in getting the radio working, but they hear strange and unfamiliar voices. Who are these people?
Oh my goodness. They connect the dots pretty quickly.
They
They
connect the dots
immediately are
pretty-
like, this has got to be other silos.
That's right. Somehow they just know the voices of all the people in the silo, and we'll move on from that.
It's only 10,000 voices. You're telling me you didn't memorize the last 10,000 voices
Good
you've
point.
ever heard?
Good point.
All right. As the tension rises over in Silo 17, Juliet discovers who attacked Solo. This was crazy. I truly did not expect this.
Yeah.
It's a small band of scared children who have been living in Silo 17 on their own, separate from Solo and Solo's access to IT and resources that has helped him survive for 30 years now.
Apparently.
Horrifying stuff. And they're too young to have...
Yeah.
They were born after this silo collapsed. Like
Clearly.
they were born in what is effectively a post-apocalyptic silo for them.
Right.
Really heartbreaking stuff here.
Yeah.
Juliet takes these children under her wing. She
Yeah.
immediately takes command, you know. She's like, you're coming with me. We're going back up to...
Classic Juliet.
Classic.
Just classic.
Just
she can't help
take
herself.
charge of the situation,
Yeah.
girl.
Yeah.
That's so hot, Juliet.
Thank you.
I love it. Meanwhile, back in Silo 18, Bernard's grip on the silo tightens. He gets more and more desperate. And ultimately, he and Lucas clash.
Yeah.
Bernard feels betrayed by Lucas,
Totally.
changes his mind about Lucas being a potential successor and future leader of the silo.
Right.
And instead, severs all ties with Lucas and says, never mind, you failed this program. And that means you're going to go clean, bud.
Yikes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It seemed for a moment like Lucas may have kind of won him over and convinced him that he was, fully an herd, but alas, in the end,
Right.
Bernard, in a sense, found him out.
Yeah.
I mean,
And to be fair, he was communicating with Juliet the entire time.
That's true. All right. Well, on the other hand, we have Juliet, who is, as you said, continuing to make radio contact with Silo 18. But this time, instead of getting either Walker and Shirley or Lucas, her long pined after lover, it is instead the devious and cutting Bernard, who taunts her, and he shares his plan to send Lucas and the rest of her friends out to clean. I mean, again, comically, just
what are you
telling
doing?
You the plot. I mean,
are you monologuing?
It's pretty.
Are you serious?
You know what? It's a trope for a reason. Classic villain. Clearly, nothing can go wrong with this plan. All things will succeed.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, she resolves to return and rescue Lucas and reveal her existence, in fact, to everyone gathered to watch the cleaning.
Wow.
She's ready to continue the revolution. I mean,
That's
really
right.
to expose the truth.
That's right. And she does. She makes her way back to Silo 18 in a patchwork suit. She enters the decontamination chamber as the doors open and nearly burns to death.
Yeah.
This was also one of my favorite chapters. Nearly burns to death protecting a stranger. She can't quite see who's behind the mask.
Yeah.
She assumes it's Lucas being sent out to clean. But obviously we will soon discover that it was in fact not Lucas.
Right. It was, I agree that was a really powerful chapter, you know.
I think so.
With that stranger pushing away from her.
What a horrifying moment.
Just a terrifying, I mean, and she has fought so long for this moment, and you can just feel the pain and tragedy of that.
Yeah, agreed. A really powerful
And then we find it's not Lucas, and then we're like, oh, great, it's just some random guy that burned to death. That's self-immolated. Wow. Well, in any case, in the aftermath of that, Juliet suddenly wakes up in the infirmary, and Lucas and Peter are at her side, both of whom we learn were instrumental in ousting Bernard.
Oh.
This kind of happens off the page. We don't really get much details, but somehow they're able to turn the tables, and in the end, it's in fact Bernard who's sent to clean.
Sure.
They also reveal that Juliet was elected mayor by a landslide. It's a clear success that she is to be the next mayor, with her rival now dead, Bernard, the only rival for the race.
If you're going to run unopposed, that's the way to do it.
There you go. As usual, she's reluctant to accept this posting, as before when she was recommended for the sheriff's role.
Right.
But it is somewhat clear that she's going to accept this mantle of responsibility. And frankly, I mean, from where we sit, the people have made the right choice in her.
Yeah. And it's going to be a different Silo. We'll talk a bit more about that
like it.
in the takeaways. The novel then wraps up on an epilogue back in Silo 17, where a young girl, Elise, notices the receding water levels at the bottom of this silo. A moment of hope and renewal for the people in Silo 17, and perhaps a way for them to escape this silo once and for all. That doesn't involve going out into the wasteland.
Right.
And that is Wool by Hugh Howey.
That's all 82 chapters, folks.
That's it. All 82 chapters of this book. What a ride.
Yeah.
Opsa, how are you feeling? What are your impressions of not only part 5, but the book?
Yes. I mean, we've said it, I think, throughout our episodes on this book, but just so entertaining. So many scenes throughout this section in particular that immediately you feel totally immersed in and can almost, feel and well, I don't want to say taste, but I mean, almost taste, So some definite highs, high highs. I do have some low lows as well in this section. So kind of pretty mixed feelings, I have to say. For me, it felt like, I think this has unfortunately been kind of a theme, that the section dragged on a bit.
Yeah.
You know, with perhaps some excessive plot filler.
Yeah, totally.
It also kind of ironically felt like it ended too suddenly. Like there was both.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
You know what I
felt
mean?
exactly that too.
It was strange. Like up until, I mean, practically chapter 80, we were still building up to the climax.
Yes.
And then suddenly Juliet is just awake and it has resolved itself without ever seemingly actually reaching ahead, which I found completely baffling, I will be honest.
Same.
You know, I hate to say it because I really do, again, stand by my earlier remarks. Super entertaining book, but it does kind of suffer at the very end here and kind of invisibly resolving the conflict.
Agreed.
So I don't know. I mean, ironically, the parts that felt like filler to me also felt like some of the strongest writing overall, in that it allowed Hugh Howey to really excel where he excels, which is painting a scene, you know, and immersing you in it.
Yes, he's very good at creating a scene, and in particular, a scene where it's man versus nature.
Yes.
Juliet submerging herself.
Totally.
Horrifying stuff.
Absolutely.
Juliet getting burned.
Yeah.
In the decontamination chamber.
Yes.
Horrifying stuff.
Totally.
Like the Lucas chapters were more intellectual and heady, and I
Right.
found the weakest.
Right.
But I completely agree with you that Hugh Howey, in this book, at this stage in his writing career, excels at writing a scene, but fumbles the ball in stringing it together.
Totally.
Into a larger narrative.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've got the perfect quote here from, you know, earlier in this section.
Yeah.
It's when Mark is dying at the hands of IT. And there's just a bit here that I really liked. Quote, Mark sprawled forward and bounced down the steps, his chin striking the steel treads. Blood poured into his mouth.
Ooh.
He tried to crawl, got his feet beneath him, and stumbled forward. Another roar, another punch to the back, the feeling that he'd been bitten and kicked at the same time. This is what it feels like to be shot, he thought numbly. He spilled down the last steps, lost sensation in his legs, crashed to the grating.
Gosh.
Epic. I mean, some just truly graphic writing that pulls you in, and it's tough to read, you know, at times.
Right.
But then to your point about stringing together the plot between these scenes, I mean, we can look no further than the dilemma of Bernard, the primary focal point of the conspiracy, the antagonist in this novel. And at the end, not even a single page.
Oh my God.
Like, we don't know his last words. What were Bernard's last words? I just want to know, as he's going down, does he, I mean, I don't know. That's
You're telling me he
thing.
threw up his hands and said, sure, arrest me and force me to go clean?
Exactly. You know, it's
not the Bernard we've known this whole fucking book.
No, not at all. You know, to be snuffed while we're not looking is a bit strange.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, I mean, is kind of the, you know, maybe his writing hadn't matured, you know, enough at this stage. But again, you know, where this section most succeeds for me, where the book in general has succeeded for me, is in those individual rich and super cinematic scenes. And I will just add to that the kind of uncertainty and, you know, the ambiguity of the alliance at the very end between Peter, Juliet, and Lucas, I found to be kind of nice and satisfying. It's clearly to tease up, you know, subsequent books.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as kind of, I don't know, adding something to the plot, I mean, granted, at the very end, there was just, you know, like a tiny bit of success there.
I agree.
But in any case, tell me.
And they didn't have the same vision for the future, right? Which is nice.
Exactly.
It would have cleaned up way too nicely if they all just kumbaya, shook hands, and said, yeah, let's do this together.
Exactly.
So, I think it was a strong note to end on with those three, for sure.
Agreed. So tell me, I guess, how you're processing this book and this last section.
Yeah, you know, I really liked part 5.
Yeah.
Of the 5 distinct parts of this book, I think it's actually bookended by the strongest.
Yeah.
Part 1, I loved.
Right.
Part 5, I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
It's those middle ones that that were very very inconsistent
Right.
for me. When they hit, they hit. When they didn't,
Yes.
they really didn't.
Yes.
And it was all over the place.
Right.
Part 5 still, to your point, like suffers from some of that inconsistency,
Yeah.
but I think it at least kind of gets us to the end
Definitely.
in a successful way.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. In particular, a couple of things I want to rattle off that I liked about Part 5, but the book as a whole. As we mentioned, Howey is particularly good at this stage in his career, writing tense survival scenes,
Yes.
man versus nature,
Right.
all the Juliet stuff. What was genuinely making me uncomfortable to read.
Yeah.
And I think that is a success when you're writing that sort of scene.
Totally.
The drama was there. The will she make it, will she not
Yeah.
was always hanging over those pages.
Totally.
The dive underwater in particular, I certainly have a very intense fear of drowning, and so those chapters in particular were nail biters for me.
Yeah.
This part I think was also paced much better.
Yeah.
There was a big section in the middle of this book that was very awkwardly paced. And while I agree that there's a lot of filler in part 5, and we could probably trim this down by easily a third, we moved along at a reasonable enough clip. There was never a chapter where I was like, why am I doing this again?
Right.
Except for the Lucas stuff. We did keep coming back to Lucas, just reading another book. And I was like, God damn it.
I'm reading a book about somebody reading a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other stuff, the Walker stuff, the radio stuff, the Juliet and Solo going on adventures, all of that I think moved along at a good enough clip that I was always ready to read the next chapter.
Yeah. And it was nice to have those multiple threads that we could follow and progress the story along.
Agreed. Speaking of Juliet, I think she is easily the strongest part of this story. My goodness.
No lie.
I love her as a character.
For a fact.
And frankly, I was just always excited to get back to a Juliet chapter.
Yeah.
I just, if I could spend this whole book with Juliet, I would. An incredible character, and props to Howey for creating a really well-rounded and excellent female character in his story.
Absolutely.
At the center of his story. I also found the reveal of the kids to be quite shocking. That was the last thing I expected to happen, actually.
It was just so much darker than really the entirety of this book. It was
dark enough that I had to just not think about it too much.
Yeah.
Because the more you think about it, the more deeply uncomfortable it becomes.
Definitely.
And it's quite shocking because, this book hasn't delved that much into darkness.
No, not of that variety, certainly.
We talked in our last conversation about how the silo doesn't seem to have criminals, really.
Yeah,
there's
day-to-day crime.
There's no one's just getting shot on floor 24 or something.
Right.
So it doesn't really dive into the dark parts of society that much.
Yeah.
But here we take a pretty unexpected and deeply dark turn with these children and how they got here and how they've survived
and their conditions.
And their conditions. Yeah. So I will say I quite appreciated that.
Yeah.
That was something I was totally shocked by in a good way.
Yeah.
Now, a couple of critiques I have. Many of these I think we've touched on in previous conversations, but there are certain areas where this novel continues to fall short for me. As you said, that conclusion with Bernard and...
Tough to call it a conclusion.
Very tough to call it a conclusion. Yeah. I also felt the rebellions in Silo 18 continued to be... we went from... We basically just blew up into all-out war so quickly, in the matter of days.
Yeah.
Again, the TV show appropriately spreads it out across weeks, months, whatever, season 2 is still in the process of working its way through this book.
Right.
That was unsatisfying for me.
Yeah.
And I will say completely unbelievable. I had a hard time suspending my disbelief and just accepting that things with the rebellion and things with Bernard just happened like that in a snap.
Yeah, I mean, even take the deaths of McLean and
and Knox.
Yeah, the deaths of McLean and Knox.
Right.
I mean,
Harvard grad Knox.
That's right. But we'd been following their narratives for a few chapters, and
yes.
I mean, most of part 4, and then unceremoniously they're
off
just
page.
Dead off page again, and that is puzzling.
Yeah, so I wasn't a fan, and I was left deeply unsatisfied by some of the rushed conclusions to things.
Right.
A lot of my previous criticisms, like I said, still remain here, even in part 5. this over-reliance on cliffhangers. Like every chapter tries to end on a cliffhanger, and if everything is intense, nothing is intense.
Totally.
Lucas is, I just don't like Lucas.
Yeah.
Every time we cut back to him, I had a tough time getting through those chapters.
Yeah.
He's just a weird character that I did not like. I especially didn't like his weird
The jealousy
thing.
moment.
Oh my
I was
God,
thinking about it
dude.
as soon as Lucas came up. Yeah. It was just kind of
It somehow made him less likable.
Yeah, totally.
Like I don't know if that was meant to be some sort of endearing, emotional. I don't know.
It just felt juvenile to me.
It felt juvenile.
You know, and it's like, I don't know why this is happening in the middle of what is an all-out war. Plus,
war.
we've got Juliet nearly drowning in the other silo, and we've just stumbled on these children. It's like,
yeah.
what?
And I do think some of the weakest writing was with Lucas as well.
Yeah.
Like even outside of his characterization, the writing in those chapters was really on the nose and a bit cringy. Like him being guilty about murdering someone and firing a gun kept coming up in ways that were just like ineffective, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like they didn't lead to anything beyond just Lucas sad and feeling bad and missing his not girlfriend. Actually, they have they been on a date?
No, they haven't.
No, they haven't. So I don't know. Lucas stuff I didn't like, and he continued to serve merely as a plot device to move other characters' plots forward.
Yeah.
So Juliet would have somebody to talk to and come back and save, quote unquote. So Bernard would have somebody to be his successor and then betray.
Right.
Like other characters needed things to happen, and so Lucas was just the one where things were happening.
He was just a natural canvas for that.
He was the canvas, exactly. Well played.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself kind of going through some mental gymnastics at times to justify, you know, either their decisions, their choices, the way they were interpreting events, and that was it's you don't really want to have to do that, you know,
No.
I don't want to have to legitimize, you know, a character's.
That's the writer's job.
That's the writer's job, you know.
Speaking of Bernard, actually, we've already touched on this, but a previous criticism we had is he's this like one-note, hook-nosed villain who just continues to be that. We don't get much more of Bernard. A little bit more in this part.
A little bit more, yeah.
But not enough to quite justify him as a fully fleshed out antagonist.
Yeah.
And we've already talked about the jealousy thing. The romance continues to be super cringe.
Oh my God.
In part 5.
Just, I don't want to belabor this, but even just when Lucas and Juliet had their like high school moment thing of,
God.
and it was just like a kiss, like all of this was about this kiss. Like, oh man, I felt like I am too much of an adult at this point to be reading this.
But also like, how is that relevant stakes? Like the stakes at this point in the story have risen so much.
Yeah.
There are children in Silo 17.
Exactly. You know.
And you're telling me like the kiss is the thing that matters so much to these people? Totally out of place. Romance absolutely did not work in this book for me. Last criticism I have, and this is something I voiced in our previous episode.
Yeah.
I said, I will be very disappointed if we end this book with practically no answers to the larger mysteries at play.
Yeah.
And if we end this book with overt sequel baiting.
Yeah.
That is exactly how we ended this book.
Precisely how this book ended. Yeah.
We got less than a couple of breadcrumbs on the larger mysteries of the silo, just some stuff about this World Order 50 thing, the truth of what happened with the apocalypse, I guess, but not enough to like really hang our coat on.
Yeah.
And if anything, intentionally we ended on more cliffhangers and more mysteries that practically beg you to buy my next book, please, and read my sequel, please. And honestly, that turns me off so much.
Yeah.
Like I'm notorious, as you know, I think we've said this on the podcast, for only reading the first book of a series.
This is so difficult. This is the hardest thing about our friendship.
But a lot of the reason for that is if I don't walk away from the first book satisfied, I am not motivated to read the second book. Because if I feel baited into reading a sequel, my instant reaction is to not.
Yeah.
And this story ended in exactly that way. And again, if we remember how this was released and published, self-published by Howey, released in parts over many months. Certainly at this point in his career, he was probably trying to get book deals out of this. he made the right strategic choices,
Totally.
right? He built his career off this book.
Yeah.
Great. Reading it now, 10 years after the fact, though, it's not satisfying.
Not entirely. And I ultimately share that criticism.
Yeah. So those were some of my criticisms for the book that have been lingering for many chapters now, and unfortunately continued here at the conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were some of our thoughts about the book as a whole and this part and our summary. So let's take another quick breather,
Let's do it.
because up next we are going to dive into some big themes and talk about our sci-fi analysis of this book.
That's right.
We will be right back in a minute, folks.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's now dive into our sci-fi analysis and dig a little bit deeper into Wool. Opsa, I'll hand it to you first. What was a big takeaway or an idea that you wanted to dig deeper into?
So, listeners will recall from the previous section that we have some complicated feelings about Lucas.
Oh, do we?
But I will say that one thing that I found to be particularly fascinating in this book was the use of memory, the use of history, the use of knowledge and education as means of control. And in this section, we get to see Lucas in particular have some of those shackles removed from his eyes.
Yes.
And I think that kind of, both for us as readers and as, just putting ourselves in the shoes of the residents, I think it highlights a lot of the tensions and just the intrigue of their world. Within the silo, it's clear that, the manipulation of history has allowed the rulers to effectively maintain their dominance, their control. Yes. And it's a pretty insidious form of control when you really think about it. It's the case that the origin of the silo is more or less unknown to all of its residents, with the exception of IT and the holders of knowledge, really. But as Lucas has it revealed to him that it's, in fact, the orchestration of the world order, he is rightly horrified.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, as he's immersing himself in the historical texts that describe the world pre-silo, he's encountering things like the U.S. Civil War and the bloody conflict and the murdering of brother by brother. And it's clear that it's complicating how he's interpreting the events that are happening in the present day.
Yeah. Yeah. That social experiment that proved in and out groups.
Yes.
And how small, pocketed, isolated societies will devolve into groups that begin fighting each other.
Precisely. And it's clear that this is one of the tools used by the world order to maintain their control. It's by manipulating and by stratifying the residents of the silo. But it's not quite so clear-cut, at least for Lucas in these moments. He sees that bloodshed and the devastation of pre-silo humans, and it, on the one hand, seems to kind of affirm the harsh response of the silo authorities.
Yeah.
But of course, no one else in the silo has access to any of these documents or any of the books.
Yeah. Or the excellent articles in Playboy magazine.
That's right. It's for the articles. So it's clear that the collective memory and the historical narratives available to the silo residents is rigidly constrained. And that means that there are whole chains of behavior and thought and relationships and explorations that are just cut off.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone defies that, we know what happens. So, you just take George Wilkins or Alison Becker. And that is what I find to be so fascinating in this novel. It's that by controlling what the populace remembers or never learns, for that matter, that this conspiracy by this small clandestine order has effectively been able to define the identity molds and societal paths for the silo residents.
Yeah.
And it's essentially invisible. It's
Yes.
it's quite curious, but it's only in having, for example, some of the threads revealed in the other silo that say Juliet has some of the shackles removed from her eyes. And as she put it, things that had once seemed twisted now had a sort of pattern, a logic about them.
Right.
But it's only in the comparison with the other silo that she can even fathom these things.
Yeah. Once her worldview expands.
Correct.
Beyond the walls of Silo 18.
Absolutely. And I think the questions that raises about identity and agency
Mm-hmm.
in a world with just such distorted records and a complicated and manipulated definition of history and the education of the residents,
Yeah.
I find it to be pretty profound. It also casts a new light on the nobility or despotism of some of the characters we've encountered. We have to recall, as much as we love Holston, that he was the silo sheriff.
Part of the system.
He was part of the system. He was enforcing the order, and the rules of the pact are pretty clear on some matters, but their morality, we would say, is pretty flawed.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Sending people out to clean because they are just
asking the wrong question.
Asking the wrong questions. I mean, we certainly would, I think, immediately describe that as immoral and,
yes.
and terribly so.
Yeah.
But the truth is that we do have to account for the fact that they were educated in a system that is designed to constrain how they think about the world and to accept what would otherwise be immoral to us as the moral act.
Yeah.
When the crowd when the crowd inside is cheering at somebody performing the cleaning, you have to wonder what direction their moral compass is pointing.
Absolutely.
But we know that one way or the other, it's been massively affected by the magnitude of the historical revisionism that they've been subjected to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In effect, the residents' future feels quite tethered to what has been a pretty carefully curated past for them.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
And that question essentially of the past and how it can either be an anchor for society that grounds us, or conversely, a chain, constricting progress and constricting possible alternate futures. That is a pretty excellent takeaway from this book that I
love
appreciate.
that. I love that so much.
I really deeply appreciate.
Yeah.
And it's clear that by the end of the book, that dilemma is not totally resolved. I mean, granted, it's annoying that it's a kind of second book bait, but it's true. By the end, it's clear that between the new leaders of the silo in Juliet, Peter and Lucas, that's right, those are the names, that the residents must now take on this question and decide it for themselves and their futures.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that's an excellent takeaway. You know what that makes me realize?
What's that?
This isn't sci-fi. Revisionist history is not sci-fi.
Right.
It happens every single day around us.
Fair.
And it has happened all throughout human history.
Yes.
To do the very thing that this world order is trying to do.
Yeah.
Control people.
Correct.
And it is this very we don't know anything about the world order, right?
Yeah.
We get hardly any breadcrumbs about them.
Yeah.
Or what their belief system is. But to me, it feels like this world order group had this very regressive view of
Right.
humanity
Right.
in which we curate history to fit a certain mold in
Yeah.
order to control people and redirect their moral compass,
Right.
as you're stating, in a direction that is more amenable to our worldview.
Precisely.
And I mean, my God, I could be describing many conservative views in America right now,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Many deeply religious views around the world in history
Yeah.
have followed this mold.
Yeah, absolutely.
If our history is anchored on this book that's full of our beliefs,
Right.
then we control the populace.
That's right.
I love that. That's such an excellent takeaway, and I think a powerful message in this book. We are our history.
Yeah.
But even more importantly than that, we are what we remember of our history.
Yeah.
And if we can't remember all of it and learn from all of it, and if everyone doesn't have the freedom to do that, then we are working with an incomplete picture and
Right.
someone is pulling the strings,
Yeah.
or at least trying to.
Yeah, as it said, history is told by the victors. And
Yeah.
right now, the victors of the silo have been this world order.
Right.
And it seems as the book wraps up that perhaps a new order is dawning on the horizon.
Yeah. One would hope so. One would hope that Juliet is an agent for change
Seems like
of some sort.
Yeah.
Get young blood in Congress is all I'm saying.
Truly the
Get-
AOC
get
of the silo.
Get this old fuck Bernard, this geriatric old fuck Bernard out of power.
Well, we did.
We did.
Not that we got any details about him, but we did.
Somehow we did.
Somehow we did.
Just trust us. Great takeaway episode. Gosh, that
Thank
really got my gears turning.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about your takeaway.
So I wanted to dig a little bit further into what I think is kind of the profound question at the heart of this entire novel.
Yeah.
This core question of security versus freedom.
Right.
And the cost of each.
Yeah.
What do we gain? What do we give up in order to achieve any of these things?
Totally.
In order to achieve the right balance of these things.
Yeah.
Which
And
I
that-
think is the larger goal.
Totally. That definitely feels like it's at the center of this novel.
Yeah. And I have a couple of examples that really illustrate this well. I want to share this quote from Shirley, actually, who has this thought as sort of the fighting and mechanical heats up and her world is clearly beginning to collapse around her. She thinks, quote, her husband was gone, ripped from her, and for what? People were dying, and for what? She thought how things could have gone so differently, how they'd all had these dreams, unrealistic perhaps, of a real change in power, an easy fix to impossible and intractable problems. Back then, she'd been unfairly treated, but at least she'd been safe. There had been injustice, but she'd been in love. Did that make it okay? Which sacrifice made more sense?
Oof.
End quote.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And that immediately
Yeah.
stuck out to me. I could not highlight that faster in my
Yeah.
Kindle. Did that make it okay? Is almost the entire question of this book.
Right.
Where do you draw that line between your securities and your freedoms?
Right.
And how does society, and can society even agree on where that line is when you factor in countless disparate opinions,
Right.
and also just human shortcomings?
Right.
People are greedy and short-sighted and dumb and angry and
Right.
spiteful. How do you factor all of those things in, and many shades of opinions on where the right line is for security versus freedom,
Right.
and decide this is what our society now does?
Right.
The silo obviously chose an extreme.
Quite an extreme.
Quite an extreme towards
Yeah.
security.
Yeah.
Other societies have obviously landed in different places.
Right. It makes you wonder about the other silos that we didn't really get to see or explore,
Right.
and the choices that they're making,
Mhm.
and how they're grappling with this question, and whether, given I think there are 50 silos is what we learn.
That's what we learn.
And they're almost all sort of experiments, maybe. I mean, kind of wonder about that, but they
Right.
are sort of like little petri dishes of human societies, and you have to wonder how they're falling on this question.
Yeah. And what happened to 17?
What happened to 17?
Did someone like a Juliet rise up in 17 and
Yeah,
try a different method
right.
of society and it collapsed?
Right.
You know? Like it certainly raises some hairy questions.
Right.
And I really appreciated getting Shirley's side of things
Yeah.
because I will say, like, a lot of this book is Juliet's perspective, and she's quite headstrong, and that's what we
Right.
love about her.
Right.
But she, I think, would very much lean more freedom, probably,
Right.
than security, given what she is now learning, you know, especially now
Totally.
that her worldview is dramatically expanding.
Totally.
Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on is that a lot of this part 5 of the book, is concerned with Lucas and Bernard. And as we mentioned in our summary, we get a number of like breadcrumbs and justifications for why this authoritarian society exists in the silo and maybe why it's necessary.
Okay.
I think there's a quote here from the head of another silo's IT who talks to Lucas during his initiation. And he puts it quite coldly. Quote, "You will have to be cruel to your children so as not to lose them," end
Oof.
quote.
Yikes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
And then that even gives me pause
Yeah.
because, if the alternative is extinction, is the only way to survive to make the cold, calculating, and cruel decisions
Right.
like the folks in the silo have to? Like perhaps
Yeah.
Bernard has to.
You don't want that decision on you. You don't want
That's
that. That's a tough problem.
That's a very tough problem. And I don't know that I have an answer or even quite know my own opinion on it. You know, even as I was writing this takeaway and reading this book and rereading certain parts, I was waffling
Right.
on which side of the coin I was on. We also get, obviously, the big reveal that this apocalypse that everyone is surviving through was self-inflicted. This world order seemingly, I guess, launched nukes and stuff, or did something that practically destroyed Earth and forced people underground. And they did it in order to reshape humanity in whatever their image was,
Right.
Whatever their ideal was for humanity. And what's interesting is Bernard hates these people.
Yeah.
Bernard is like, fuck those guys.
Yeah. This is the first bit of nuance in his character, but
And
yeah.
yes. And I
Totally.
was so glad to get it.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my
totally.
God, Bernard has an opinion on something
Right.
that isn't just him being evil,
Right. Cackling.
cackling. He hates these people, but also he believes very strongly in his conviction that they are still doing the right thing
Yeah. Right.
because they're following what these world order people are telling them to do. The
To a
pact was
T.
written by them,
Yeah.
but he's like, we still got to do it. It's
Yeah.
still the right thing to do. Quote, "They put us in this game, a game where breaking the rules means we all die. Every single one of us. But living by those rules, obeying them, means we all suffer." End quote.
Well put, Bernard.
Well put, my
I gotta
guy.
give it to you.
Honestly, more of that, please, from you.
Props. Yeah.
Do you suffer or do you die?
Hmm.
What is the choice there? That's the binary in Bernard's mind, and he is choosing suffer and survive,
Yeah.
rather than extinction of this silo and its people.
Right.
And I will say, to some extent, Lucas, you mentioned this earlier as well, but Lucas kind of understands this rationale.
Right.
He doesn't wholeheartedly believe it and kind of comes around to Juliet's side of things by the end, but he gets it a little bit,
Yeah.
especially when the fighting and mechanical heats up, for example.
Right.
There we get this quote. Quote, "The short-term rage to be sated at the end of a barrel was too easy to act on. Staving off extinction required something else, something with more vision, something impossibly patient." End quote.
Oh yeah. I mean, deeply insightful. Like Lucas, he does get it. He understands
Yeah.
to some extent the dilemma that Bernard is facing here.
Yeah. And I think that also scratches at an idea about the difficulty of their predicament.
Hmm.
We are facing the apocalypse. We are facing human extinction.
Right.
Not only is it going to require us to be cold, cruel, and calculated, it will also require us to be endlessly patient.
Right.
It has been hundreds of years, and it could be hundreds of years more before we can go back to the surface.
For all they know.
That is a sacrifice that I will concede would be a tough ask of a community.
Yeah.
Because people would disagree.
Well, how do you take that to a vote?
How do you even vote on something like that? How do you even enforce something like that in a community even as relatively small as 10,000 people in a silo?
Yeah.
You're going to have disagreements. So perhaps the world order people were right. This level of sacrifice and commitment requires ironclad rule, and for people to forget that they are making this sacrifice. We make it for them, us, the heads of IT. You begin to sort of understand the justification.
Right.
Not that I agree with it, but maybe I understand it. Even Juliet over in Silo 17 kind of understands, or begins to understand, when she meets those child survivors. Quote, "At the next landing, she again touched her hip where her birth control rode under her skin. Such things made more sense in light of Silo 17. So much about her previous life made sense. Things that had once seemed twisted now had a sort of pattern, a logic about them." End quote. Maybe the logic of these fucking world order people.
Yeah. It's twisted.
It's twisted. It's also self-inflicted, right? Like they seemingly blew up the world.
Right.
But in order to survive what they inflicted upon us, we kind of also have to do what they say. There's like a logic to it, maybe.
Right.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, as we discussed, like that is not where Juliet ends up. Once at the end of the book, she's elected mayor of Silo 18. She chooses to pave a new path forward and create a different future.
Yeah.
And she makes the case for this future being an alternative to how they've lived for generations. Perhaps we should have been doing this all along. Quote, "Instead of manipulating people, why not empower them? Let them know what we're up against and have that drive our collective will."
Preach!
End quote.
Oh, so good.
And you gotta love that.
You gotta
know?
love it, yeah.
It's aspirational. It's inspirational.
Yeah.
Is it naive? Is sort of the lingering question this book leaves us with, right?
Right.
And so to wrap up the takeaway, I wanted to maybe ask you and have us ponder about this a little bit more, right? Because there's arguments to be made for both sides. Arguments to be made for this extreme security and authoritarian rule in the silo, and arguments to be made for more freedom and open conversation, like Juliet decides at the end of the book.
Right.
Where do you think you fall? Where does your line get drawn in this debate?
That's a great question. And I think, actually, and I will say miraculously, I think I have an immediate answer to this.
Oh, I did not expect that.
And I will quote the late, the great Benjamin Franklin.
Okay.
And say, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety."
Okay. Yeah. A very famous quote.
A very famous quote. So I think that because that's in my head, that's my answer. I don't think I'm going to top that. I mean, I fundamentally, I think this is a deeply difficult question to practically contend with when you're facing circumstances that force you to choose.
Yeah.
And I think when you're facing just the abstract, I mean, my answer is the abstract as well. It's what Mr. Benjamin Franklin said, which is you cannot give up your liberty for safety.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wrote this in the script, this question for you in the script, and I was like, damn, I'm really risking us getting into a long philosophical response from Opsa about this. Just because I know the type of thinker you are, like you really don't think in absolutes. You're such an open-minded person that you're open to all schools of thoughts, and you're so flexible in that. Like I sometimes am too definitive in my own beliefs, and I'm very rigid in that. And so something I've always admired about you, but you seem to be quite steadfast here in this belief.
In this case,
Mr.
Franklin, you can do no wrong. You're on the $100 bill.
That's interesting. Well, you know what? My response to this is actually kind of a shrug and an I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'm a little more cynical.
Yeah.
And my line, if we were to imagine this like as a spectrum between freedom and security, I would be a little more security than where you fall, I think.
Yeah.
Mostly because the there's a part of me that just doesn't trust people.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
Juliet's choice here at the end
Yeah.
bestows trust on
Really
10,000
trusting.
people
That's a good point. It's very trusting.
to figure out survival for
Right.
their whole community.
Right.
And to come to a consensus in that.
Right.
And to not make any mistakes along the way.
Right.
Because again, we potentially have hundreds of more years to go of this
Right.
before it's safe to leave the silo.
Yeah.
And
The
so
outside is toxic. Like that, we cannot forget.
yeah,
that
we
the
cannot forget
world
that
outside
part.
is literally toxic.
We can't go outside, guys.
And previous rebels have tried to go out into a toxic environment.
yes.
I mean, them's the facts, you know.
That's exactly the thing that concerns me.
Yeah.
You know, like I have a harder time trusting that 10,000 people can come together and it not be messy.
Right.
Am I advocating for authoritarian rule? Absolutely not.
Right.
But it's a very messy question.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that I fall on kumbaya, everybody get together into a circle and say your feelings and we'll figure this out together.
Right.
I think that to me feels a bit naive about human nature,
Totally.
right? Humans are fickle, humans are oftentimes unreliable, certainly prone to many faults.
And certainly violence is one of them.
Violence among them, high among them, I
High
would
among
wager,
them, yeah.
based on human history.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit more cynical. And for me, the balance leans a bit more security.
Yeah.
I'm also like sort of a risk averse person. And to dive into the risky unknown of a silo
Right.
under Juliet
Right.
is a scary prospect.
No,
You know,
totally.
like I'm a sucker for rules and process and
Sure.
workplace and like workflows.
Yeah.
I'm a very like type A person like that.
Yeah.
And so Juliet is opening a can of worms.
Right.
And I'm nervous to see where it goes, but also I do believe she's headed in the right direction. It will just require more nuance than let's just open all the books, open
Right.
all the floodgates
To everybody
and
at
let
once. Yeah.
to everyone at once.
Right.
You know, that to me is naive and
Yeah.
foolhardy. I do think Peter and Lucas will be the tempering force there
Right.
that will likely help her keep things a bit more contained and structured.
Right.
So as always, there's nuance. There's no clear answer, but it's an interesting question nonetheless that this book poses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so takeaways done, big brain thoughts done. Let's round out and complete today's discussion by giving this book our final rating.
Okay.
What would we rate this book out of 5?
All right. I guess we're doing it.
We're doing it.
Okay. All right. So I'll start.
Yeah. Yes.
So I will say, I think I've said this in every episode, I have enjoyed this book.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, conspicuously absent in our episode today has been any mention of the Apple adaptation.
Yes.
I will say, I love the Apple adaptation.
So good.
I like the book.
Yes.
And I will focus for the remainder here on the book. So I think 60% of this book is phenomenal. Like I would rate 60% of this book 5 silos out of 5.
This has got to be cheating, but continue.
It's the only way to do it.
This unhinged rating system.
I don't know. I will tell you my rating for each fractional part of this book. My system has evolved. It's fractional ratings.
Sure.
I would highly recommend chapters 17 through 24. But no, in all seriousness, that's been my experience of this book, that there's a decent part of it that is tremendous.
Yeah.
But then there is a half of it, you know, maybe a little less than half, that is decidedly more mixed.
Yeah.
You know, plenty of satisfying twists and turns and inspiring choices and character arcs throughout the book. But also, we do get some of that weaker, more rushed storytelling that just feels like it didn't have enough time in the oven, you know? A little underbaked and, you know, therefore a little underwhelming in certain parts. We've said it plenty of times, some of the characters and the topics could have been a little more nuanced, a little
Yep.
more layered.
Yes.
And instead we're somewhat surface level. Bernard is the easy pick for me. It's my constant example. But we've also commented, of course, on the overuse of, narrative devices, for example, which this book is pretty guilty of.
Yes.
I don't want to retread that ground, but for me, the consequence of some of those deficiencies is essentially a loss of immersion in what is an otherwise brilliant world that Hugh Howey has painted for us. And I've definitely lost myself in the book several times, but just whenever that immersion bubble pops, I kind of lose a little patience for the book, maybe, I guess,
Same.
or
Same.
interest in it. So again, 60% of the book, excellent.
What does that even mean? Okay.
40% of it, more mixed.
Okay.
So doing my math there, I think based on that, I have to give this book, I think, a solid 3 operations of the world order out of 5.
Okay.
Which I believe comes out to 60%.
60%. You did your math right.
So
Okay.
in any case, really enjoy this universe. Lots of what ifs that were great to explore. I would recommend the book to, I think, based on our conversation today and just our review of the book, I think more a general fan of fiction
Yes.
than like a seasoned sci-fi enthusiast.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
And then given the option of the television adaptation and the books, yeah, I mean, I would suggest the show to more people,
Yes.
just practically speaking. But in any case, I think reading the book and watching the show has been a really fun experiment. If you're super hardcore, then that's my suggestion. Do both.
Do both and listen to our podcast.
And listen to the podcast.
Which presumably you already are if you made it this far.
Hopefully. So in conclusion, I guess I give this book, the 3.
Okay.
3 out of 5.
Okay. 3 world orders out of 5.
That's right.
Okay.
Hit me with your rating.
I once again I'm going to be a little more left of you here. A little. I'm going to give this a 2 uprisings out of 5 uprisings.
2 uprisings. Okay.
I think while I agree that I enjoyed parts of this book greatly,
Yeah.
I did not enjoy this book as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I have to dock a lot of points. We've already tread a lot of ground on our criticism, so I won't rehash, but I walk away from this book feeling meh. And I will also admit that my perception of the book has been deeply colored by the TV show.
It's impossible to avoid
which is
it.
just so good.
So good.
It's an excellent TV show.
Yeah.
And it actually just recently, on the day we're recording this, a couple days ago, it got renewed for seasons 3 and 4.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, we're going to presumably, and I think they planned for 4 seasons originally. So we're going to see the conclusion of the TV
Fantastic.
show, which is,
Yeah.
I'm so stoked
Totally.
for. I have a tough time decoupling that, however. And so reading the book, I could never really forget about the show sort of lingering
Yeah.
in the ether. And so because of that reason, I think the book felt lesser than.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I agree. I think this is a book for fiction fans, for fans of mystery novels,
Yeah.
and less so for folks like us who have
Right.
maybe spent their entire childhoods reading dense sci-fi.
Right.
This is a book that what you read on the page is about what you get.
Right.
And I think the takeaways that we've been able to discuss from it have been great.
Yeah.
But that has been the depth of it.
Yeah.
And there aren't many more layers to it, which personally for me, I like something that's a bit more dense, a few more levels down, some might say.
Something
in the
to
silo.
sink your teeth into.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something that's flooded on the bottom.
That's right.
Make me dive deep.
I barely want to survive this. I can't
Right.
breathe.
I want the book to almost kill me. All right. Well, so this was such a fun read through.
Yeah.
I had such a great time. We got some lovely emails and conversations with our listeners in Discord about this book. The TV show is still coming out as we record. We're
Indeed.
about midway through season 2.
That's right.
So expect our concluding thoughts and review of season 2 once the TV show ends in January.
Right.
So expect a little bonus episode coming about that soon.
That's right.
Speaking of what's coming up, though, you and I are going to try and enjoy our holidays.
I hope we all are.
I hope all of us, including you,
right.
dear listener. So this podcast will be on break until January, and then we will be back with a brand new book.
Indeed.
And if you're wondering what that book is, don't forget that in the show notes, as always, you can find the link to our entire season's reading schedule, which chapters to read, due dates to read them by, when episodes are coming out, all of that good stuff. So check that out. And pro tip, you might want to put a hold on A Psalm for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers at your local library.
Spoiler alert!
Because that's the book we're diving into next.
That's
What,
right.
that's what we'll be getting into
Exciting stuff.
after the holidays.
That's right. Well, friends, instead of manipulating people, why not empower them? And leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, you have to be cruel to your listeners
Ooh.
so as not to lose them.
That's right. We're not mean to you because we're cruel. We're mean to you because we love you.
We love you.
And we want you to stay. And you're ugly.